where does the media fall into this equation? Because I am no fan of the mainstream media. I mean, I get when Trump talks about fake news, now again, I don't know what his moral center is. The guy obviously lies left and right. So I put that out there. At the same time, I do get the fake news thing. I see the way all of the news spins everything constantly, that almost everyone now is a partisan hack. It's almost impossible to get anything honest. Where does the media fall in the free speech conversation? Because it's like we need some mainstream media that we trust, because it can't all be reliant on online media, because there's a lot of garbage here too.
Sure.
You know, and people can say whatever they want about me. That's fine. I'll defend their right to say it. But where does that fall into the conversation? Having a strong media and a fourth estate.
I mean, I think it is an absolute must-have. I don't think you can have a functioning democracy without it. And I think that there is enough diversity. I think that the danger right now is what people are calling the siloing of it. And you are able now just to get the media that reinforces your already held beliefs and your preconceived notions. There is no requirement in any of these outlets to hear a genuine opposing point of view. You get to hear talking points and kind of lip service oftentimes. It's one of the reasons I like your show and like listening to it. You get to hear opposing points of view without the shouting and the quick.
I could turn
10
on you at
seconds.
any moment.
Yeah, you could. Bring it on. So to me it's a little, and it's also actually I think I have a little bit of a different perspective on this too, because the work that we do at FFRF is historically very, very unpopular. And so I interact with the media. I mean, I do probably maybe 300 or 400 interviews every year. We do, or the legal team, not myself.
Yeah.
And what you say to the media and what is actually happening, the genuine facts on the ground versus what gets reported, the distance between them can be so great. And it can even be really great when you're talking about the nonpartisan groups, not just Fox News. Fox News is just insane when you're looking at what is actually happening in an FFRF case and what is reported on Fox News is just,
right.
It's night and day. But even some of the local stations.
Do they bring some of your guys on there?
They've actually kind of stopped doing that.
Really?
Yeah, because we've been effective. My first interview ever on any TV was Bill O'Reilly.
Huh.
I sat down with him to talk about Obama's second inauguration and whether or not taking an oath on the Bible and saying, "So help me God," after the oath of office he should do that. My stance was he shouldn't do that because the Constitution lays out the presidential oath very clearly, and it doesn't include the words "So help me God."
Yeah. How about put your hand on the Constitution, the thing
Exactly.
that we're actually governed by, that
exactly.
we all agree is the thing we're governed by?
Precisely, and so that's what I was arguing for, and it was a completely bizarre experience too, because I had a earbud in, and Bill O'Reilly's just talking into my brain, and I'm just looking into a camera trying to fight with him. It's very disconcerting.
Yeah. Even that little thing, for people that don't know, this is a little insider baseball. When you do those satellite shows, sometimes there's a little delay on the video, so it's even hard to match that up, and that's why those conversations are very stilted at times. And obviously he's a seasoned pro who's going to get his points across, and they've done a pre-interview with you and all that. We don't do a pre-interview here. I talk to you for 30 seconds before we
start. And it's nice to be able to see you. Yeah, and it's nice to be able to see you. But you're absolutely right. Yeah. And that was how it went down with Bill O'Reilly. And his whole shtick is to interrupt you anyway before you can get your point out. And with that little bit of a delay, it made it even worse. He did tell me that I was going to be going to heaven and that I could have a conversation with George Washington and Martin Luther King when I got there. So.
It's funny, I'll probably get some shit for saying this, but I think generally he's one of the more moderate people at this point on cable news. I think he actually does try to talk to people from both sides. Now, he may not be perfect at it, and I've been on there, and he compared something I said to Hitler, so, it's all relative. But okay, so when you said that to him, the idea of why wouldn't you put your hand on the Constitution, the thing we're governed by, what's the comeback to that? Like, I genuinely have never understood a cogent comeback to that.
I mean, I don't think there is one, right? The argument always goes to tradition, and it's the idea. Well, George Washington, he put his hand on a Bible, and he said, "So help me God." He didn't say, "So help me God." I actually got Bill O'Reilly to admit that on the air. I felt like that was a pretty good win. And any argument from tradition is just, to me, is immediately suspect. Mm-hmm. And I think it should be thrown. If you can't come up with a good reason now to be doing something, other than it's been done for 200 years. I don't want to hear that. I think that's a terrible argument, and it's especially terrible when you're talking about courts deciding cases. But it's something that comes up in my line of work all the time. It's very, very frustrating.
I mean, the tradition argument not only just doesn't make sense because it's not what we're governed by, but a lot of the people that would argue for that are the same people who were annoyed when Keith Ellison, who converted to Islam, when he he swore in on a Quran. Well, that's his religion thing. So if it's the idea of tradition, well, then you should respect other people's traditions too. But
they went bonkers over that.
Yeah.
I mean, the best example of this, and the best example of it,
I think it's all nonsense. Just to be clear.
The best example of it playing out in law
Yeah.
is a 1983 decision that the Supreme Court made. Marsh versus Chambers. Ernie Chambers is this great Nebraska state senator, just a firebrand. His hose his own row. He's just an amazing guy. Sued the Nebraska legislature for having a chaplain that gave Christian prayers before every session. Quick side note, we've paid, you and I, as U.S. taxpayers, have paid $10 million to chaplains for the House and the Senate to give prayers every single day before sessions. So, it's a nice use of our money. Anyway.
Yeah. It seems particularly odd now because Trump is not religious in any way. Like, he got the evangelicals behind him, but when he went to Liberty University and he had that sweaty speech where, 2 Corinthians, and he's bumbling and fumbling over the whole thing. And you can see when he goes to these things, these religious related things, he's a businessman. He is secular, I believe. You may not like his secular beliefs. But it all seems all the more ridiculous now.
Well, and I mean, it goes to Trump's religion. First of all, he won 81% of white evangelicals, which is more than W, more than McCain, more than Romney. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it shows something about, I think, their willingness to elect somebody with these authoritarian tendencies. I think it's I think it's sort of this substitution proxy. Like, this is the God of our Bible, is this authoritarian. If you don't love me, I'm going to murder you. And he pay back immediately and viciously. I think there's a little bit of substitution going on between those two. Anyway, that's kind of beside the point. We were talking about tradition in this case, right? And the Supreme Court said that prayers can be opened at any legislative meeting because we've been doing it since before there was a Constitution. Which it blows the mind because so before there was a separation of state and church in the Constitution, then before we amended the Constitution with the First Amendment, there were prayers. So we're going to go ahead and let you continue to have prayers now. It's nonsense. I mean, and the dissents in the case said, any first-year law student could look at this and say that yes, having a Christian prayer before a legislative meeting is an endorsement of religion and it violates the separation of state and church and is struck down. Yeah. But because it's been going on for so long,
Right, that not only does that make no sense, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, obviously, but even if you were to throw in 5 other religions and a secular prayer or a secular statement, it would still be ridiculous.
Yes.
So it's not, for me at least, it wouldn't be just about the exclusivity of all the other religions and just giving a Christian prayer. It just makes no sense altogether.
Agreed completely. And, but it is, and it always ends up being exclusively Christian. From 2000 to 2015, Congress gave 2,085 Christian prayers. Something like 62 prayers were given by a Jewish invocant, and then I think 8 Islam, and then 3 others.
Yeah.
And that's it. So, I mean, you're talking 99.7% or something like that to Judeo-Christian gods.
By the way, to be completely fair and show people we're not picking on Christianity somehow, when the rabbi gave the speech was it right before Trump took the oath of office or right after? Which one? Was it before
I don't
or
remember.
after?
I don't remember.
It was within 5 minutes on either side. I mean, whether it's a rabbi or Christian, I think all of it.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with the government.
Absolutely, and it shouldn't have anything to do with the government.
So what do you say to people, and I've had people that I really like and admire and respect sit in that very chair and say to me that you can't fully separate religion and government because we're based in Judeo-Christian values. I get that from Dennis Prager, who I really like and admire.
Yes, this is the topic of my book that is hopefully coming out soon. I'm talking with a couple of publishers. The idea, so I think first of all, if you back up, the idea that we're a Christian nation, I think most thinking people can reject that idea. Some of them can even refute it. But the fallback position is what you're talking about. Well, we're founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And it's fundamentally not true. First of all, nobody ever tells you what a Judeo-Christian principle is. They're hiding in the vagueness of that term, right? And second of all, it is just not true. If you look and this is what I do in my book, if you look at Judeo-Christian principles, if you look at the Ten Commandments, each of the Ten Commandments, and break them down, if you look at the principles that are central to the Bible and break them down, and compare them to America's founding principles, they are in such disagreement, so fundamentally opposed to one another, that it's fair to say that Christianity is un-American.
Right. So, for example, I think they would both, our Constitution and the Ten Commandments would agree on the murder thing, right? We'll give them one to start. We would agree no murder.
I would agree no murder.
Okay, but believe in one God. That's in the Ten Commandments. I
Sure.
don't think that has anything to do with our Constitution.
Sure. I mean,
we actually have the reverse.
Yeah, the Ten Commandments begin. First of all, whenever you get into an argument with somebody about the Ten Commandments, you have to ask them which Ten Commandments are they talking about. There's 4 sets of Ten Commandments in any given Bible, which most people know.
Are there 4 different sets?
4 sets. Exodus 20, Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 5, and Deuteronomy 27.
The whole thing's so preachy. It's so preachy.
I mean, and most people don't realize, one of those is just a list of people that are cursed.
Yeah.
And the first set, which is what everybody thinks of as the Ten Commandments, Moses comes down off the mountain, they're not even called the Ten Commandments in the Bible. It's the second set that is actually called the Ten Commandments that he has to go make. Moses comes down off the mountain with the Ten Commandments. The only artifact that God has ever inscribed and proven his existence on, and smashes them because he's angry that his people.
Pissed.
Yeah. Anyway.
And in a Mel Brooks movie, he had 20 commandments, but then broke
15.
Or was it 15?
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
Wait, what movie was that? I'm blanking. That's History of
History of the World.
Yeah, History of the World. Okay.
Part 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, leaving aside the Brooksian recklessness, the Ten Commandments, the Ten Commandments themselves are, even when you get into the rules like murder and things like that, those aren't Judeo-Christian. These are universal human principles that every society we know of has come up with on their own. And to call them Judeo-Christian and say that specifically Judeo-Christianity influenced them rather than our innate humanity, I think is arrogant. It's the kind of arrogance that I am, as an atheist, am often accused of.
Yeah.
And furthermore, if you actually look at the way the Ten Commandments are written, and I'll make this argument in the book, the don't murder, don't lie, don't steal commandments really only applied to other believers. So it's not equal justice under the law, what we have in our system. It was don't kill your fellow believers, otherwise go for it. And if you look at the Bible, I mean, what does God do in the books right after the Ten Commandments? He orders them to go slaughter. They commit something like 70 genocides in the book of Joshua. So killing's perfectly fine as long as you're not killing your friends, your brothers, and your neighbors.
Yeah. You mentioned arrogance, and I think that this is one of the words that gets prescribed to atheists a lot. And I see this with Bill Maher particularly, and I think he's been the most outspoken American atheist, probably. That people, well, he's just too, I like what he says, but he's too arrogant, he's too whatever. And my defense of him, I really like and admire him, is that, he's put himself out on a ledge here that is not a popular ledge to be on. And he takes hits now he gets more hate, I think, from the left, but he gets hit from everybody. And he's a little arrogant about it. He's a little smug about it. He is, and I don't think he would deny that. And I'll ask him that one day, I hope. But what do you do with that? For someone that is in your position,
Sure.
This idea that atheists are somehow, they're holier than thou and they're smarts or that kind of thing.
To me, it's...
I don't get that from you, by the way, but I think
I appreciate that. I mean, to me, I think it's kind of amazing because if you look at the claims, my claim for atheism is I don't see any evidence that a God exists, so I don't believe in one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty minimal claim, really.
Do you make a distinction between that and agnosticism? I don't like going down the rabbit hole too much because I think
Sure, I do.
Lost, but.
Atheism is a statement of belief. Agnosticism is a statement of knowledge. And there's no way we can ever know a negative. So I'm also an agnostic. I'm also a humanist. I'm also a skeptic. I'm a secularist. The only label that I choose to give myself, even politically, is atheist. And the reason that I do that is because, I think when we label ourselves, JFK has a great quote, and he says that too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. And I think that labels are just the quintessential example of that. I don't know what you think about something, but I'm listening to you talk. And then you say, oh, I'm a conservative. Okay, I don't have to listen to anything you say anymore. I know what your views are. I can ignore the words coming out of your mouth, or I filter those words through the prism of that label, right? Yeah. So to me, it's labeling something is a way that we can enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. So I try to avoid that. But atheism is the exception that I make to this, because I want people to put me in that atheist box in their brain, and then I'm going to break out of it, right? Like, I want them to think that I am this arrogant, this awful person who hates life, doesn't enjoy their family, and is just miserable. Because I'm not. I'm a happy guy.
Yeah.
I love life. I try to get the most out of it. I'm probably a little bit arrogant. I'm a lawyer. But it's...
So really you're a terrible person.
Really, I'm a terrible...
That's a legal thing, not really a human thing.
Exactly. But so the point being, like, that is the one label that I will adopt for myself. Even though I am all those other things, and I do it for the reasons that I want to. I want to shatter people's misconceptions about what it is to be an atheist.
Yeah.
But getting back to the whole idea about atheists being arrogant, to me, it's a very simple question. Like, my statement is, there's no evidence to believe in a God, so I don't. The religious point of view is, I have no evidence but complete faith. I have absolute unshakable certainty, without any evidence whatsoever, that this is true. And to me, that's a far more arrogant belief than what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
can those things ever really be reconciled in a society? Like, let's say everything you do for the rest of your career goes exactly how you would want it to be, right? And you're able to maybe bring some people along and wake some people up, so to speak, and all that. There's always going to be religious people, and many religious people, by the way, are perfectly good people who give a lot to charity and have good home lives and do all sorts of great things. And I think they've done studies where actually religious people give more money to things. And
if you include the church,
right. And the church is tax exempt also, which is all. We can get into that too. But do you think that in a functioning Western democratic society that those things really can be reconciled, or that we're always going to sort of have this battle?
I think there will always be religion, and I think as long as you're living in a democratic republic, people are always going to, those who are in government are always going to try to use their positions in a certain amount of way to promote their personal beliefs. And when their personal beliefs are religion, then it becomes a big problem. When their personal beliefs are based in science, it becomes less of an issue. But I think there's always going to be a conflict between at least an intellectual conflict between religion and non-religion. I think religion demographically is in a tailspin in this country. I think it's on its way out. And one of the really weird things about working for a nonprofit, you said if I'm completely successful, I'm out of a job. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's a weird thing.
So this is like the cops need a certain amount of crime thing, right?
Well, and this is the only good thing about Trump. The only silver lining for me is I have got job security. Like, there's no problem for me for 4 years. And especially if you look at his cabinet and his vice president, and who are probably pushing a lot of the policy. It's very scary from a state church standpoint.
Yeah.
Very, very scary time.
For a guy like you, I suspect you probably fear a Mike Pence in a way more than you would fear a Trump, right?
Sure, in a certain way, absolutely. Yeah. Mike Pence is very scary, as is the cabinet. Rick Perry is a guy who, when his state had a drought, he held a prayer rally, which we sued him over. The state caught fire after his prayer rally instead of it raining. Yeah.
Were they facing the wrong way? Which way you're supposed to pray?
Maybe they weren't dancing. They were praying to the wrong God. I don't know. Sonny Perdue, Secretary of Agriculture, same thing. His state was going through a drought. He counseled prayer. Scott Pruitt, head of the EPA, I've tangled with him. He thinks that it's okay for public schools to distribute Bibles to students. So these people are very scary for me.
I'm curious. Do you find that there's a little bit of a point that you can't reconcile here, where you obviously believe in the Constitution, and our government has gotten much bigger than the Constitution ever really wanted, I think, maybe you disagree, that all of the regulations that the government has put on are not things that were really supposed to happen, yet you don't want them to, you know what I mean? You're trying to fight things that maybe aren't constitutional, but you want some regulation too. Did that make sense? I think I got somewhere there.
I think so. I'm not...
In other words, the government got much bigger than the framers intended.
Yes.
And now you like some of those regulations because they keep some of this stuff out of the public square, but
But
it's
really,
still a problem.
Really, it's kind of two questions. Really, so for my state church work, really all we rely on is the Constitution itself and some state constitutions. And there are some peripheral laws that allow us to bring lawsuits and statutes that allow us to bring lawsuits and things like that. But really, if you look at the original Constitution without the amendments, it mentions religion once in Article 6, which is to prohibit religious tests for public office. The only mention of religion is exclusionary. Then you have a couple of amendments. Again, the First Amendment mentioning religion twice, again excluding government from religion, and vice versa. So the only mentions of religion in the entire Constitution, which is godless, doesn't mention God at all, are completely exclusionary. So really, the center and the core of my work is based on that. I think what you're talking about more broadly, and I can bring in some of my environmental background here, is the idea of the administrative state.
Right. So that's where I'm going. So I get it on the religious front. So then on this front, where you want, as an environmentalist, you want some regulation, and yet at the same time, that's not exactly what the Constitution prescribes the federal government to be able to do.
Sure, and it is, I think, different than what the founders intended. But the Constitution is also different than what the founders passed. We have a lot more. It's been amended many times since the founders. And the administrative state, it's a little weird, and you take whole classes on this in law school, because there are some genuine, simple reasons for having it. So Congress, Dianne Feinstein was actually talking about this earlier in the Gorsuch confirmation hearing. She's talking about, well, we can set fuel standards for, say, the next 10 years. We're able to. We have that information now. But we need experts at the EPA, say, to do it for the 15, 20, 30 years after that. We don't have that kind of scientific expertise. So what we're doing is we're delegating our authority to the EPA on that. And, the courts are pretty good about coming in and saying when you can and when you can't do that. The whole, this Chevron deference that you're hearing about in the news is all intertwined with this. So I think it's different than what the founders intended, but I don't think that necessarily means that it's unconstitutional. It's certainly becoming unwieldy, but that also doesn't mean that it's unconstitutional. That's a policy issue.
Yeah, and I see this as a very gray area.
Sure.
I'm not saying that they're not doing anything, that they're doing something unconstitutional, but just that the power and the reach of the federal government and the way the states have given up so many rights, I view that as a
So you're talking about federalism then.
Yeah.
So federalism is the balance of power between the states and the federal government. And that's kind of it's in the Constitution, it's in the 10th Amendment. It says that the powers that the federal government doesn't have are reserved to the states. But again, that's changed a lot over the years, especially with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And because the federal government is spending so much money now, which they're perfectly allowed to do, they are allowed to put strings on that money. And that's one of the ways they're able to do a lot of these things that you don't hear about very often.
So isn't that an inherent problem? Because it's sort of like a hostage situation. Like if you want money for this, you better start doing this, and that may not exactly be what our jurisdiction says.
Well, but courts are willing to strike that down. The Violence Against Women Act was kind of this famous where the courts struck down the Violence Against Women Act, saying that it was an overreach of the Congress under the Commerce Clause. They weren't allowed to do this. So I think courts are willing to defend that, but the power of the purse belongs exclusively to Congress. They are allowed to spend in whatever way they want, and they can attach strings to that money if they want to. So it is difficult. I see your point, but you have to figure out a different way around that.
Yeah. So for an example would be like the trans bathroom law in North Carolina, where Obama started, first off, trans people have been going to the bathroom for a long time. I've never seen a study saying that it's a problem where they're going to the bathroom. So it became an issue. Then, of course, the media firestorm about it. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Obama basically said, if you don't allow them to do this, we're going to, he was either going to cut funding for certain state things, and we saw places, the NBA said we're not going to have our All-Star game there. That's a separate thing from the government, of course. But that general idea I didn't like, because I don't want, for a basic non-issue, something that I don't think is a major issue. I'm not talking about trans rights, their right to equality, but they've been going to the bathroom wherever they wanted. It wasn't an issue. That then we all get hysterical about it, and then what's the answer? The federal government should now tell us what to do.
And I think I see your point there.
Yeah.
But I also think there's the idea that it's not really about bathrooms in the way that it wasn't. A lot of these fights are symbolic. Lunch counters, water fountains, those weren't the most pressing problems facing the civil rights movement, but they can be powerful symbols when you're trying to trying to change the way people view a certain minority and trying to assert the rights. So I think it's important to look at it both, and we run into this problem all the time. I mean, in the Freedom from Religion Foundation, what we do, we're fighting symbols constantly. 10 Commandments on public land, crosses on public land, and those are important fights to have for that very reason. So I think it's not necessarily just about the bathroom, and it's not necessarily about a non-issue. Kind of in the way that it's not necessarily about baking a cake or giving flowers to a gay wedding in that arena.